Today, the Strait of Hormuz is almost automatically associated with giant tankers, drones, and constant military standoffs. It would be a mistake to assume its importance began with the discovery of black gold. The strait was strategically vital long before pipelines and sanctions. Oil did not create its value, it merely multiplied it. This topographical map shows the foundational rule of the region. The strait functions as a permanent geographic lock. Through this narrow gap, a state with a relatively small territory can wield absolute global influence, simply by holding the passage and taxing crossing ships. Hormuz is a trap. History shows again and again that whoever approaches this unmoving physical corridor with ambition eventually runs into violence. In the early 16th century, Portuguese navigators arrived in the Indian Ocean. They did not want to merely participate in the existing trade network. They wanted to capture key passages, collect duties, and turn the sea itself into a strict imperial possession. If you look at this animated diagram of 16th century sea routes, you see what the Portuguese understood. Capturing Hormuz allowed a single empire to dictate the flow of spices, pearls, and horses moving across multiple continents. Whoever controlled the node controlled the flow. But the geography of Hormuz carries a fatal flaw. Settling there secures dominance, but it instantly turns the occupier into a target. In 1622, a coalition of Safavid Persians and the English East India Company expelled the Portuguese, proving that holding the lock attracts the forces determined to drive you out. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the British Empire needed to secure its own route to India, and the Persian Gulf became a space to be carefully monitored and stabilized. Instead of building massive physical fortresses to block the route, London relied on an indirect approach. They used flexible naval deployments and diplomatic alliances with local authorities to manage the balance of power. The pattern was set. Holding the passage secures regional dominance, but the strait forces empires to think constantly about the possibility of war to defend it. The 20th century introduced massive hydrocarbon discoveries. The vast reserves of the Gulf turned the strait from a regional trade corridor into a planetary artery. What happened in Hormuz now dictated the functioning of the global economy. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah. The geopolitical balance shattered. Iran shifted from a pro-Western pillar into a revolutionary actor, determined to assert itself against the Gulf monarchies and the United States. Within a year, the Iran-Iraq War began. As the conflict dragged on, both nations attempted to cripple each other's economies by striking civilian merchant ships. This was the tanker war. The world learned a terrifying mechanic of the Chokepoint. The passage doesn't need to be physically blocked with sunken ships or concrete. It only needs to become threatening enough to make the journey expensive, dangerous, and psychologically unbearable for insurers and governments. As the threats to navigation mounted in the late 1980s, the United States escalated its military presence to explicitly protect global energy flows, actively escorting tankers. But increased presence created direct friction. In 1988, the USS Samuel B. Roberts struck an Iranian naval mine. Washington launched swift retaliatory strikes against Iranian targets, demonstrating how quickly a tactical maritime incident in a confined space spirals into open combat. A few months later, the tension reached its darkest point. Operating in a densely packed, highly militarized environment, the crew of the American cruiser USS Vincennes misidentified a civilian airliner and shot down Iran Air Flight 655, killing all 290 people on board. In a narrow space saturated with military fear and speed, confusion itself becomes a destructive force. The end of the Cold War and the conclusion of the Iran-Iraq conflict failed to bring true stability to the region. Today, modern Iran relies on a doctrine of latent disruptive power. They know they do not need to permanently close the strait to exert massive pressure. By continuously reminding the entire world that the passage could be fully disrupted, Tehran maintains a powerful political weapon. Daily commercial navigation functions as a continuous hostage negotiation, subject to the constant threat of naval harassment and ship seizures. The actors and the tools have changed. 16th century colonial forts have been replaced by radar systems and drones. The cargo has shifted from spices and pearls to hydrocarbons and liquid natural gas, but the core structure remains exactly the same. The physical geography has not yielded an inch. The modern global economy passes through a corridor that is too narrow, too exposed, and too historically charged to ever be calm. It is a system built entirely on an eternal geographic vulnerability, proving that in power politics, a 21-mile strip of water can hold more power than an entire army.